Last Tuesday, I found myself sitting across from a guy I've known since university. Let's call him Julian. On paper, Julian is exactly what the modern mating market claims to be looking for. Early 30s, a top-tier tech salary, a disciplined gym routine that shows, and a calm, centered energy. We were at a high-end lounge, and the room was practically vibrating with that high-stakes energy of people trying to be seen. But Julian wasn't looking. He spent the better part of an hour describing a 48-hour deep work protocol he'd just completed, his eyes lighting up only when he talked about optimizing his cognitive load. When a group of women settled at the table next to us and started making deliberate eye contact, Julian didn't even flinch. He gave them a brief professional nod and went right back to explaining why he'd moved 80% of his liquid assets into a private, sovereignty-focused trust. I finally asked him the obvious question. Julian, you're in your prime. Don't you feel like you're missing out on the game? He leaned back, took a slow sip of his drink, and gave me a look that was more pitying than arrogant. I'm not missing out, he said quietly. I've just read the terms of the contract. He pulled up a dating app on his phone, scrolled past a dozen hyper-curated profiles for 3 seconds, and then closed it. Look at the digital distortion here. The algorithm is designed to keep them searching for a ghost and to keep me paying for the privilege of being invisible. Why would I invest my capital, emotional, or financial into a system that's biologically and legally rigged for a total loss? There was no anger in his voice, no bitterness, just a cold, actuarial assessment of a market he had decided was no longer worth the risk. That quiet, rational withdrawal is what we are now seeing on a global scale. A mass dating strike that is leaving the traditional marriage market in a state of terminal collapse. And that conversation has just been sort of replaying in my head all week. It wasn't the simple act of him rejecting dating that stuck with me. It was the way he framed it.
The coldness of it.
Yes, the rationality. Because, usually when we hear about men stepping away from marriage or from dating, the cultural narrative paints it with a really specific brush.
Right. It's always about anger.
It's anger. It's resentment. We hear terms thrown around like incel or, the assumption is that these are just guys who can't compete. They're losing the game, so they're flipping the board over in a tantrum.
That's the standard narrative. It's a very convenient way to dismiss a phenomenon, isn't it?
Yeah.
You frame it as a personal feeling of the participants, not a systemic failure of the market itself.
Exactly. But Julian, he breaks that narrative completely. By every single metric society hands us, he's a winner. Yeah. He has the resources, the status, the social calibration, all of it. And yet he's consciously, rationally opting out.
He's not flipping the board. He's just refusing to sit down at the table.
He's refusing to play. And when I started going through this stack of research you brought in for this deep dive, I realized Julian isn't some weird outlier. He's a leading indicator.
He is.
We're not looking at angry blog posts or, forum rants today. We're looking at doctoral dissertations on fertility crises in developed nations. We're looking at technical audits of algorithm mathematics from places like RSF, legal reviews of the marriage contract.
We are. And the picture that emerges when you put all these documents together is, well, it's stark. And it completely validates what your friend Julian was getting at.
Right.
The materials we have here, they don't describe this phenomenon as giving up. The term that keeps appearing, especially in the economic papers, is rational divestment.
Rational divestment. That sounds like something you'd read in a shareholder report.
And that's the point. It's a specific financial term. It implies that a growing number of men are analyzing the relationship contract not through the lens of romance or tradition, but through the lens of, say, risk management and asset allocation.
Like a stock they're deciding not to buy.
And they're coming to the conclusion, in massive numbers, that the math simply doesn't pencil out.
It's the calculus of withdrawal.
That's the perfect way to frame it. And to really understand why this is happening on a global scale, from, the high-end lounges in New York to the herbivore enclaves in Tokyo, we have to break this down into 3 core layers.
Okay.
First, we have to look at the legal and economic risks of the marriage contract itself. The sources call this the asymmetrical contract.
The thing Julian said he'd read the terms on.
Exactly. Then second, we have to look under the hood of the technology that's supposed to bring people together. That's the algorithmic distortion of the dating apps.
The digital distortion he mentioned.
And finally, we look at the macro-sociological result of those first 2 things. It's this massive societal shift toward what's being called monk mode and the intense accumulation of human capital.
So we're essentially reverse engineering Julian's decision. Let's start right where he did. the contract. I have to admit, I'm a romantic at heart. I think of marriage as a union, a partnership. But this paper you've got here, The Law and Economics of Marriage and Divorce, it just strips all the poetry away. It reads like a corporate autopsy report.
It does, and that's intentional.
Yeah.
To understand this calculus of withdrawal, you have to, for a moment, suspend the romantic view and adopt the purely legal and economic one.
Okay.
The central argument in this particular text is that modern marriage, as a legal instrument, has evolved into a state of contractual asymmetry.
Contractual asymmetry. Break that down for me. It sounds like something I'd hear in a merger negotiation that's about to go very, very wrong.
Well, it's a good analogy. Think about a standard business contract. If you and I decide to start a company, we sign an agreement.
Right.
We define our roles, we define our contributions, we define what constitutes a breach of contract. If I start embezzling funds, or if I just stop showing up to work, there are clearly defined penalties.
Of course. You break the contract, you pay for it. That's just basic fairness.
It's the foundation of contract law. It's designed to protect the investment of both parties based on performance and good faith. Now look at modern marriage laws through that same cold economic lens. The argument presented in this source material is that what it calls the divorce industrial complex, and that includes the family courts, the mediation systems, the entire legislative framework, has created a kind of liquidity trap for the higher earning partner.
And statistically, even in 2026, that's still more often the man.
It is, though not exclusively, of course. But the asymmetry comes from the fundamental decoupling of fault from financial penalty.
You're talking about no-fault divorce.
I am. And we have to be extremely clear here. No-fault divorce was introduced for very important, very humanitarian reasons.
Right, to get people out of awful situations.
Exactly. It was designed to allow people, often women, to escape abusive or just dead marriages without having to go through the expensive and humiliating process of proving cruelty or adultery in a court of law. It was a safety valve.
And a necessary one, I think most people would argue. You don't want to force people to stay in miserable or even dangerous situations.
Absolutely not. And none of the sources are arguing for a return to the 1950s. That's not the point. The point is to analyze the unintended economic incentives that the current system creates today, decades after its implementation.
Okay.
The asymmetrical contract theory argues that what we've inadvertently created is a unique legal instrument. It's a partnership where one party can unilaterally end the agreement for any reason at all or for no reason. Boredom, finding someone new, growing apart.
Any reason.
And not only that, but the other party is then contractually and legally obligated to subsidize that exit, often for years or even decades.
This is the asset expropriation concept that's highlighted in that legal review.
The text frames marriage as a potential mechanism for a state-sanctioned transfer of capital. And here's the asymmetry. The upside of marriage love, companionship, children, emotional support is entirely non-contractual.
What do you mean by that?
You can't sue your spouse for ceasing to love you. You can't get a court order demanding they be kind to you or respect you. The benefits, the good parts, are entirely voluntary. They rely on goodwill.
But the liabilities?
The liabilities are mandatory and federally enforced. Alimony, asset division, the garnishment of future earnings. These are not voluntary. They are legally binding.
So from a purely, let's say, behavioral economics perspective, a guy like Julian is looking at this deal.
He's looking at an asset class where the dividends are completely unenforceable, but the debt is absolutely guaranteed.
It's a high-risk, low-return partnership with catastrophic exit costs.
That is a direct quote from one of the case studies in the text. A subject, a financial analyst, noted that in no other area of civil law would any sane person sign a contract where the other party is, in some cases, financially incentivized to break it.
Incentivized is a very strong word.
It is, but the liquidity trap argument is built on it. It suggests that for the lower-earning partner, divorce can represent a financial windfall or, at the very least, a long-term financial safety net provided by the higher earner. For the higher earner, it is almost always a pure loss event, financially speaking.
A catastrophic loss, potentially.
So when you combine this legal framework with the risk-adjusted ROI mentality of someone who works in tech or finance, someone like Julian, whose job is literally to assess risk and return all day, the decision to stay single isn't emotional.
It's a hedge.
It is a risk-hedging strategy. He's hedging against a volatility he cannot control and a downside he cannot afford. He is, as he said, reclaiming his sovereignty.
It makes sense why he used that specific phrase, a sovereignty-focused trust. He's trying to keep his perimeter secure. But here's the thing. Governments aren't blind to this, right? They see the birth rates plummeting. They see men checking out.
They're in a state of panic about it, especially in East Asia and parts of Europe.
I was reading through that dissertation you included on South Korean fertility policies, and it seems like the state is actively trying to rewrite the contract. They're throwing immense amounts of money at the problem.
They are. And South Korea is really the canary in the coal mine for the developed world here. They have by far the lowest fertility rate on the planet. The government is desperate. They've tried everything. Cash handouts for babies, subsidized housing, you name it. Most of it hasn't worked.
But the dissertation on the C Group conglomerate, that offered a fascinating counter-narrative. It was a little sliver of hope, maybe.
A very interesting one. This was the study on that massive Korean company, one of their huge cables, that took a radical step.
This was the one that forced all its male employees to take paternity leave.
Correct. This is referred to as Study C in the source material.
Yep.
The conglomerate mandated 1 full month of fully paid paternity leave for all male employees. No exceptions.
And mandated is the absolute key word there, because usually paternity leave is a perk on paper, but in these hyper-competitive cultures, nobody actually takes it.
Almost never. And the research is very clear on why they don't take it. It's what economists call the stigma cost.
The stigma cost.
In a hyper-competitive corporate environment, if you take a month off to hold a baby, you are signaling to management that you aren't fully dedicated. You're signaling that you're not a corporate warrior.
You fall behind.
You get passed over for promotions. You lose status. Your colleagues who didn't take leave get ahead.
So it's a classic prisoner's dilemma. If I take the leave and you don't, you win. So the rational move for both of us is to take no leave.
We both end up with a worse outcome. No time with our kids. But we avoid the individual career risk. But what the C Group did was change the default setting.
So?
By making it mandatory, they completely removed the signal. If everyone has to take it, then taking it doesn't signal that you're lazy or uncommitted. It just signals that you work at C Group. It becomes part of the job description.
And the results of this experiment were surprisingly positive, weren't they?
They were statistically significant, which is huge in a study of this scale. Fertility among the treated employees, the men who were forced to take this leave, rose by approximately 15%.
15%. That's, in demographic terms, 15% is baby boom.
It's a seismic shift. And the deep analysis in the dissertation suggests it worked because it directly addressed and reduced the provider burden.
The provider burden.
Yes. It signaled to these men that the company, and by extension, the contract of their employment, would actively support them in being fathers rather than penalizing them for it. It fundamentally reduced the career risk associated with having a child.
So this seems to suggest that policy can work. If we change the terms of the contract, if we de-risk fatherhood, men will sign up.
Well, this is where it gets complicated. And this is where we have to contrast that specific, hopeful study with the broader, more pessimistic year-end 2026 report source.
Okay.
That studies show that policy can absolutely move the needle for men who are already inside the system. Men who are employed, who have jobs at these top-tier conglomerates, who are already considering partnership.
But for the Julian archetype?
More.
Or for them who aren't in those elite jobs?
For them, the report argues these policies are essentially band-aids on a bullet wound.
Because giving a man a month of paternity leave doesn't fundamentally change the divorce laws.
Exactly. It doesn't solve the core problem of contractual asymmetry. Even if your company gives you a supportive month off, if your marriage dissolves in year 5, you could still lose half your assets and a significant portion of your future income.
The catastrophic exit cost is still there.
It's still there. The broader dating strike narrative suggests that for many men, especially those with significant assets to protect, no amount of corporate or government policy can offset the fundamental legal risks of the marriage contract itself.
So you end up with this bizarre situation where the men at the bottom of the economic ladder feel they can't afford to play the provider role.
They're priced out. The dissertation on South Korea is brutal on this point. It finds that men who cannot meet the normative expectation of financial responsibility simply opt out of having children entirely. It's not even a choice.
And at the same time, the men at the top, the guys like Julian, the ones with the assets to lose, have looked at the rules and decided the game is rigged against them.
It's a pincer movement. The men at the bottom are priced out of the provider role because wages haven't kept pace with the cost of housing and family formation. The men at the top are consciously opting out of the provider role because the personal and financial liability is just too high.
And the result?
The result is what that one source describes as a market correction. an organic, bottom-up correction. Men are going liquid.
Going liquid, like in finance.
They are refusing to invest their emotional and especially their financial capital into a market sector where the projected returns are negative and the risks are unmanageable.
Which brings us, I think, to the mechanism of how people actually meet today. Because let's just say a guy decides to ignore all that risk. He says, you know what? I want a family. I'm willing to sign the contract.
He's willing to take the plunge.
Right. So he downloads a dating app. And this is where the story, according to these technical papers, gets even darker. Julian used the phrase digital distortion. And I think most of us, we assume dating apps are basically just digital bars. You walk in, you look around, you strike up a conversation.
That digital bar analogy is completely and utterly false. And it's a dangerous misunderstanding of the technology.
Why?
Because a bar is a public square. The physics are the same for everyone. An app is a proprietary, closed marketplace run by a black box algorithm that has zero interest in your happiness or your marriage.
It has an interest in its own metrics.
It has one interest.
Yeah.
Engagement. Keeping you swiping. And to understand how it does that, we have to talk about this concept of the sexual Gini coefficient.
Okay, for listeners who might have skipped Economics 101, let's just quickly explain the Gini coefficient. It's usually used to measure wealth inequality in a country, right?
Correct. It's a simple scale from 0 to 1. A Gini coefficient of 0 means perfect equality. Everyone in the country has the exact same income. A coefficient of 1 means perfect inequality. One person has all the money, and everyone else has absolutely zero.
So for reference, a healthy Western democracy like, say, France or Canada sits somewhere in the middle, maybe a 0.3 or 0.4. There are rich people, there are poor people, but there's a large functional middle class.
Now, the source material we're looking at from Quillette and some of these data analysis audits from Hinge and Tinder applied this exact mathematical formula to the economy of dating apps.
And what's the currency in that economy?
Likes and matches. They are treated as the capital. Who gets them, and how are they distributed?
So what does the economy of modern love look like, according to the data?
Well, it depends entirely on who you are. The data analysis suggests the female dating economy looks a lot like a Western European country, meaning it has a relatively healthy Gini coefficient. There's inequality, for sure. Some women are vastly more popular than others, but the distribution is functional. Most women receive some level of attention. There's a middle class.
Okay. That sounds reasonable, but for men?
For men, the dating economy does not resemble a functional country. It resembles a failed state, a kleptocracy.
That's a strong comparison.
The data is stark. The male dating economy has a Gini coefficient that is more unequal than any society on Earth. Worse than South Africa under apartheid, worse than feudal societies. It is a state of extreme inequality.
And there was one stat in there that just made me stop reading.
I think I know the one you mean.
The one that says the bottom 80% of men are competing for the attention of the bottom 22% of women.
That's the one. And you have to let that sink in. The bottom 80%. This isn't just about the guys who are socially awkward or unemployed. We are talking about 4 out of every 5 men. We are talking about the average guy, the accountant, the teacher, the electrician, the guy who works at the bank.
The male middle class.
The middle class of the male dating market has been effectively liquidated. It's gone. The data shows that the top 78% of women are, almost exclusively, competing for the top 20% of men.
So if you're a man in, say, the 50th percentile, you're of average height, average income, average looks, you're not just getting less attention than the top guys, you are statistically invisible.
You are, for all intents and purposes, pixelated noise. The source calls this the digital greenhouse effect. And you have to think about the contrast with the past. In a traditional village context, or even a university setting, that average guy would have found a partner. His value would be demonstrated through 3-dimensional interactions over time. His humor, his reliability, his kindness, the way he treats his mother. The app flattens human beings into 2D trading cards judged in half a second. And when you flatten people, you commoditize them.
And it's not just that women are consciously ignoring them. The argument here is that the algorithm is actively hiding them. This Arviv paper on fair match algorithms talks about collaborative filtering and popularity bias.
This is the black box. This is the core of the distortion. You have to remember, the algorithm's goal is to maximize engagement, not to get you married. It wants to keep you on the app, swiping, maybe paying for premium features.
So how does popularity bias achieve that?
It's a simple, brutal feedback loop. If a user's profile gets a few likes early on, The algorithm interprets that as this is high-quality content, so it boosts that profile's visibility. It shows it to more and more people.
It's the rich get richer effect.
It's exactly that. But the inverse is also true. If you're a new user and you don't get those crucial early likes,
You fall into the abyss.
you fall into what's called the long tail. The algorithm effectively decides you are low engagement content and stops showing your profile to the most desirable users. You could be the most wonderful husband and father material in the entire city, but if your first 6 photos don't trigger a dopamine hit in 0.5 seconds, the system buries you alive.
This explains precisely what Julian meant when he said the algorithm is designed to keep women searching for a ghost.
That is the validation dopamine loop. And this is a really critical point in the psychological research that's cited. Imagine a woman of average mate value, let's call her Sarah. In a pre-app world, in her village or town, she would realistically match with that average accountant, Marcus.
Up here.
But on the app, Sarah is suddenly inundated. She receives hundreds, maybe thousands of likes.
And the source material argues many of those likes are fake, or at least very low intent.
They're extremely low intent. The men, who are frustrated by their own lack of matches, adopt what the source calls a spray and pray strategy. They just swipe right on everyone to maximize their chances.
But Sarah doesn't know that.
Sarah has no way of knowing that. She just sees her phone buzzing with 500 new likes. She sees matches with men who are, in the real world, objectively out of her league. Top-tier men who might be willing to sleep with her, but will almost certainly never commit to her.
But her brain doesn't make that distinction. A like is a like.
Exactly. It creates what's called the digital mirror effect. Her self-perception of her own value on the market is calibrated, or rather miscalibrated, by the app. She starts to think, well, if all these top 10% guys are liking my profile, why on earth would I ever settle for Marcus the accountant?
It's a logic deadlock.
The source calls it mate screening lock-in.
Ah!
She filters out her realistic, attainable peers because the algorithm has fed her a completely distorted view of her own market value. She ends up holding out for a ghost who will never materialize for a long-term relationship.
It's digital hypergamy on an industrial scale.
And it leads directly to what the evolutionary psychologists in these papers call an evolutionary mismatch. Our brains, our mating software, evolved for life in small tribes of maybe 150 people.
Dunbar's number.
In a tribe like that, if the best hunter or the tribal chief smiles at you, it's a significant high-cost signal. It means something.
But in a digital database of 5 million people,
a like costs absolutely nothing. It's a zero-cost signal.
Yeah.
But our Stone Age brains haven't caught up.
Yeah.
We still interpret that meaningless digital signal as real, tangible sexual interest.
So we have this broken ecosystem where 80% of the men are effectively starving for any attention at all, and a huge percentage of women are overwhelmed by a feast of what is essentially junk food options that look appealing but have zero long-term nutritional value.
That is a perfect summary. And the result is what one source calls polygyny returns. The technology has unintentionally reintroduced a kind of digital harem structure. A very small percentage of males monopolize the vast majority of female mating attention.
And the result for the other 80% of men?
The result is herbivorization.
Herbivorization. This feels like it brings us to the physiological response. Because if you're that guy, if you are Marcus the accountant, and you spend 6 months swiping, maybe you pay for premium, and you get 0 dates, 0 conversations, what does that do to your brain chemistry?
It's devastating. You withdraw. And it's not just a conscious decision. It's a deep biological self-preservation mechanism. Constant, unrelenting rejection is biologically expensive.
What do you mean by expensive?
It spikes cortisol, the stress hormone. Chronically high cortisol is linked to a host of health problems, and it's been shown to lower testosterone. The source suggests that men withdraw not just out of anger or frustration, but to protect their own psychological and physiological homeostasis.
They stop trying because the cost of customer acquisition, to use a brutal business term, has become infinite.
It's a rational shutdown. The system is sending them a constant signal of mating failure, and the adaptive response is to exit the system to preserve the self.
And then that withdrawal isn't just about, sitting on the couch playing video games. It's becoming a full-blown lifestyle. This takes us perfectly into the third part of our deep dive, the macro-sociological withdrawal. We see this most clearly in places like Japan and South Korea, where they actually have terms for it. Soshikuke.
Soshikuke danshi, yes. Or herbivore men.
I've always disliked that term. It sounds like an insult. It sounds like you're calling someone a wimp. because they won't, eat meat in the metaphorical sense.
And that is absolutely how the mainstream media, both in Japan and in the West, has portrayed it. But the dissertation you have there, redefining hegemonic masculinities in East Asia, argues that we need to completely flip that definition.
So
it argues that it's not an act of weakness. It's an act of rebellion.
a rebellion against what, exactly?
A rebellion against the crushing expectation of the salaryman ideal, the corporate warrior who sacrifices his entire life for his company. In South Korea, the kids have a term for their society. Hell Joseon.
Hell Joseon.
Yeah.
That implies a society that is fundamentally unlivable.
It refers to what they see as a new neo-feudal caste system, a life of hyper-competitive education from the age of 4, leading to impossible housing prices, and a work culture that demands your total and utter self-sacrifice.
And the traditional deal was you endure all that.
You work yourself to death, yes, but in return, society gives you a wife, a home, and the respect that comes with being a provider for your family.
But now, as we've discussed, the housing is unaffordable for most, and the provider status itself has become a source of immense legal and financial risk. The deal is broken.
The deal is broken. So the herbivore man isn't someone who is failing to be a salaryman. He is someone who is consciously refusing to be a salaryman. He has looked at that deal, that social contract, and he has said, no thank you.
So where does all that energy go? If a young man isn't working 80 hours a week to save up for a wife and kids, what is he working for?
This is the crux of the capital reallocation theory. The sources describe a massive, society-wide shift in human capital formation.
Okay.
Think about the archetype mentioned in the study, a young man in Tokyo named Haruto. Haruto is not saving his money for a wedding, which in Japan can cost a fortune. He's not saving for a down payment on a 3-bedroom apartment in a good school district.
That frees up an enormous amount of capital and time.
Massive amounts. So what does Haruto do with that surplus? He invests it in the only asset he feels he can truly control, himself.
He treats himself as the primary asset.
Exactly. The sources detail how these young men are pouring money and time into specialized career competence. Things like advanced coding certifications, AI modeling courses, foreign language skills that make them more valuable on the global market.
And financial markets, too.
Absolutely. High risk, high reward financial instruments, cryptocurrencies, day trading, setting up those private sovereignty-focused trusts we talked about earlier. Because he doesn't have dependents, his risk tolerance for his financial capital is very high, but his risk tolerance for his personal life is now very, very low.
It's that sovereignty focus again. He's building a fortress around himself.
And interestingly, the capital also flows into what we might broadly call self-care. The dissertation notes a literal boom in the men's skincare industry, men's fashion, and high-end personal hobbies.
There's that incredible quote in that translated Reddit thread we analyzed. A guy said something like, I realized a single date costs $150 and has about a 90% chance of being a disappointment. A new high-end tennis racket costs $200 and has a 100% chance of improving my serve.
And that is the entire microeconomic shift in a nutshell. It sounds trivial, that one decision, but you have to multiply that decision by 10 million young men across the developed world. It's a market risk aversion strategy on a massive scale.
The source argues that buying that tennis racket is a political act.
In a way it is. It's a quiet declaration that I am the primary beneficiary of my own labor.
He's refusing the breadwinner burden. He is refusing to be a resource to be extracted by a family or by society.
He's building what one author calls unassailable personal capital. He's making himself robust and anti-fragile. If the economy crashes, he has in-demand skills. If he gets sick, he has his own savings. He is not legally or financially vulnerable to the divorce industrial complex because he never entered it.
But we have to ask the hard question here. This sounds, in a way, liberating for Haruto. He's got great skin, a killer backhand, and a fat crypto wallet. But what happens to the society that is made up of millions of Harutos?
That is the terminal collapse. You cannot run a civilization on herbivores. You can't sustain a nation on self-care and coding boot camps alone. The sources are very, very clear on this. This is a demographic cliff. Japan, South Korea, and increasingly parts of Europe are facing an existential crisis. There is no next generation of Harutos being born.
And the state knows this. That's why they're in this state of panic with all these pronatalist policies.
They are. But the year-end 2026 report makes a crucial distinction. It suggests that this dating strike is not actually a protest.
What's the difference?
A protest ends when your demands are met. If a union goes on strike for higher wages and the company eventually gives them higher wages, the workers go back to work. The system is restored.
But this isn't a union negotiating for better terms.
No. This is an exit. The source argues that these men are not waiting for a better deal from society. They have fundamentally concluded that the industry itself, the traditional marriage market, is obsolete and rigged. They are going liquid.
Like we said before, from finance.
It's the perfect term. In finance, going liquid means you sell off your illiquid assets, like real estate, and move everything into cash so you can be nimble and move fast.
Yeah.
And what is marriage, if not the ultimate illiquid asset?
It ties you down.
It ties you down and, as we've discussed, exposes you to immense liability. So the rational move, according to the cold calculus in these sources, is to stay liquid, stay mobile, invest in yourself, and wait.
It's a profound shift in the human condition. For thousands of years, the core meaning of life for most men was to build a family, to pass on his name, to provide and protect. And in the span of a single generation, we are watching that core programming get overwritten by a new code. Survive, optimize, withdraw.
And the connecting thread, the thing that ties Julian in the lounge to the math of the algorithms, to Haruto buying skin cream in Tokyo, is rationality. That is what is so often missed in the mainstream discussion. We have to understand this. Julian isn't crazy. Haruto isn't lazy. According to the framework laid out in these sources, they are rational actors responding logically to a specific and punishing set of incentives.
If the marriage contract carries an unacceptably high risk, and the dating apps distort reality to make finding a partner nearly impossible, and the economy demands your total sacrifice for a deal that no longer exists,
then not playing becomes the only winning move. The sources argue we shouldn't view this as a dysfunction or as some kind of incel rage. We should view it as a rational, predictable adaptation to a hostile environment. Nature is not moral, it is functional. It's a place for survival.
And right now, for a huge and growing number of men, survival looks a lot like solitude.
Or at least sovereignty. What we're witnessing is a massive cohort of men deciding that the most adaptive strategy for their own survival in the year 2026 is to sever the ancient link between their productivity and the reproductive cycle of the species. The system, what the sources call the divorce industrial complex and the digital oligopoly, is functioning precisely as it was designed, to maximize consumption and anxiety. And the only way these men have found to win that game is to simply stop playing. This strike isn't the death of desire. It is the birth of a colder, more sovereign rationality that focuses on building unassailable personal capital while waiting for the world to change.